Welcome back to Solo Marvel Champion. A few weeks ago, my subscriber Jonathan asked for a video about how I build decks, and this is that video. I want to start by saying that I am definitely not a master deck builder. In this video, I'm only going to talk about what goes through my head when building decks. Also, audio will fluctuate a little bit in this video because I'm recording across different days and in different places in my home. I'll try to match the audio as best as possible, but I can only hope that it's not too off-putting. When I sit down to build a deck, there are three things I like to consider first. Number one, am I playing true solo or multi-hero? This does affect deck building. When playing true solo, you have to cover all the bases. In a multi-hero game, your heroes can split duties while having some overlap. I say multi-hero because you might be playing a 2 or more handed solo game, or you can be playing with other players. 99% of my games are true solo, so that is the perspective of this video. Number two, am I building a general or targeted deck? A general deck is one that can beat multiple villains with few or no changes. This is my typical mode and will be the perspective of this video. A targeted deck is built to defeat a specific villain or campaign. An example of this is my Deadpool deck, which defeats Ronin in 2 turns. You only need 3 cards to pull that off, but most of the cards in that deck are there to help mitigate that one villain phase you get, because you're going to get 3 or more encounter cards. Number 3, and this one can be a little bit tricky, is do I choose a hero or aspect first? Obviously, you could just pick your favorite hero, that's valid. You could also just choose your favorite aspect, that is also valid. You might be following Get Up in Game's perfect matchup list, which suggests a hero and aspect to play against a specific villain. Or your buddies might say, hey, let's run Rise of Red Skull this weekend. Who wants to play aggression? It might be theme or any number of reasons to choose a specific hero or aspect first. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to choose a hero first, Hawkeye, so I can demonstrate how I evaluate a hero kit. When I'm evaluating a hero kit, I'm looking for 5 things. What is the hero good at? This could be their attack, thwart, defense, readying, etc. I look at both sides of their identity card, all of the cards in their kit, and especially at their HP. I don't make any decisions yet. This is just a step to identify what they're good at. Next, I look to see what the hero is not good at, and that follows the same criteria. I'm also going to say that with the exception of one hero, I don't consider a small hand size to be something the hero is bad at, because they'll typically have cards in their kit to compensate. Number 3, do they have resource generators, and if so, are they for general use, or are they restricted to being used for certain card types? Number 4, do they have a support or upgrade which is really beneficial to their game? If they do, we do have some cards to help find them. Number 5, is there something in the kit that I can exploit? And for me, this is actually the hardest one to evaluate because you need to realize there's something there you can exploit, and then know how to exploit it. So sadly, I do whiff on this evaluation most of the time. One last thing, I do not look at their Nemesis set or obligation, but that's just me. Now, let's go down to the playmat and I'll evaluate Hawkeye. I want to take a crack at Hawkeye because I've always struggled with him in the past, but I have gotten better at deck building since the last time I played him. Alright, we can start by looking at his alter ego. He only has 9 hit points, so I am most likely going to run Endurance just to get him up to 12. His action, actually, I forgot about this. For some reason, I remembered this being a setup ability, but it's not, it's an action. Spend a resource to find his bow, add it to your hand. That actually is a lot better than just a setup action or setup option, because if you get caught off guard, you can discard the bow, then come back down to alter ego to get it back. So I do like that. Let's flip up. 1-2-1 stat line is not great, although that's really 1-3-1 because he is going to get a +1 attack. His arrows also gain ranged, which, you know, that can come in handy with some villains. Action, exhaust Hawkeye, ready his bow. That's a little bit iffy just because he is going to have an attack of 3. But it might be worth it. We'll have to wait and see. These numbers already kind of tell me what he's going to be good and bad at. 1 thwart, 3 attack, that says a lot, but let's look at the rest of his kit. Do always like to start with an ally if they have one. 3/2/2/3 interrupt when the villain initiates an attack against you. Spend 1 resource of any type and return Mockingbird to your hand. Prevent all that damage. Now that actually can be exploited. I think it will be expensive to do that though. Now, you can do that and prevent the damage, and then if you're running, say, meditation, you know, flip down to alter ego, pay her back for free or play her back for free with meditation, and that could be a way to go. I know there's a resource generator. I think he's got 2. Yeah, he's got 2 resource generators, but they're only good for arrows. So that's not going to help pay for Mockingbird if I want to exploit that. So basically, that means I would have to go, if I wanted to really exploit it and use it a lot, I'd have to either put 3 resource generators in the deck to play her for free, or I could run meditation and do it in alter ego. I don't know that that's worth it, but it is worth thinking about. Those are my resource generators. Let's look at his arrows. I believe he's got 10 of them. That is an attack. That's not an attack, but it deals damage. That's the same one. Vibranium is an attack. Sonic is an attack. Attack. That one is a thwart. I'm going to hold on to this for a second. That's his quiver. Thwart. Attack, attack. Okay. So already you're starting to get, or I'm starting to get a really good picture here. He's got 1 thwart and only 2 thwart events. He's got 3 attack and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 attack events. And I can pay for those attack events with my expert marksman. So that really tells me right now what he's good at. He is good at dealing damage. He is not good at thwarting. He also does have, he actually has 2 upgrades that are going to be really good for him. Of course, Hawkeye's bow is going to be free. Not free, but you're going to be able to get it into play right at the beginning of the game, and then later in the game when you need to, or if you need to. So I won't count that one. I am going to count Hawkeye's quiver, though. This one can be really good, and I think it does warrant running superpower training. It only costs 1, so it's not about reducing the cost of this. It's really about being able to get it when you want it. So I'll probably end up running superpower training, but that's one of those things where I might decide not to run superpower training or cut it later. But right now it looks interesting. Let's look at 6, 7, 8. I said 6. He actually has 8. Well, not attack. 6 attack events and 2 that just deal damage to villains. So that's 8. That actually makes him even better at attacking / dealing damage. I did want to, and even on this cable arrow, it's remove threat and ignore crisis icons. So that is good. This one deals to everyone. This is a confuse and deal 3 or more. This is a deal 6 with piercing. This one is stun and deal 3 or more if it was already stunned. And then those repeat. So there is a little bit of status effect stuff going on. But for the most part, I know that he is going to be good at attacking and dealing damage. Not so good at thwarting. I do have a support that looks interesting enough that I might run superpower training. He does have this card, Mockingbird, that can be exploited. I just don't know if it's going to be worth it. So that's how I evaluate Hawkeye for good or bad. That is the knowledge I'm going to take when I go to start building the deck. So now that I've evaluated Hawkeye, I have a choice to make. Do I lean into what he's good at, attacking and dealing damage, and status effects to a degree? Or do I shore up his portability to remove threat? And while I think I can exploit Mockingbird, I think I'm going to pass. I think I'm going to shore up his threat removal, which means I could go with Justice or Leadership, but I think I'm going to go with Justice. However, I think a quick aspect review would be helpful for newer players. I'm including all 5 aspects here since we do have a 5th now with Pool. And also, this is a very brief summary and as few words as possible. Going alphabetically, let's start with Aggression. Aggression is the aspect which most deals with dealing damage and increasing damage for your heroes and allies, with events, supports, and upgrades. You'll see more Stun in Aggression than Confuse, but both are present. Aggression provides several ways to interact with minions, either in helping to defeat them or rewarding you for doing so. There is some Thwart available in Aggression, but it is filtered through the lens of attacking and dealing damage. I do want to state that despite my favorite matchup being Rocket Aggression versus Ultron, this is actually my least played aspect. Justice is the aspect which most deals with threat removal and provides several ways to confuse enemies, although there is some stun as well. Similar to Aggression, Justice provides some attack events, but they're tied to removing threat and thwarting. Justice interacts with schemes in general, but even more so with side schemes, again either helping you defeat them or rewarding you for doing so, one of the most popular cards of which is Skilled Investigator. Leadership concerns itself with allies, buffing them, healing them, readying them, and recurring them with cards like Make the Call, Rapid Response, Regroup, and Med Team. Leadership also provides different ways to put allies into play, and even to discard them for effects. While this is mostly what it does, there are some great cards outside of this mold as well, like Clarity of Purpose and Mission Leader. I also have to say something here about Hero Kit evaluation that I was saving to mention here with Leadership. The first thing I look at in a hero's kit is their ally if they have one. If it has a really good enters play effect, Leadership goes to the top of the list so I can recur that ally, getting multiple uses of its ability. I don't always go with Leadership in this case, but it does go to the top of my list. Next, I look to see if they have a really good resource, and if they do, I'll often run Leadership for the Beast ally. Now it does have to be a really good resource, like Captain Marvel's Energy Absorption or Gambit's Molecular Acceleration. And as before, this doesn't mean I will run Leadership, it just goes to the top of my list. I haven't played enough of the pool aspect yet to get a firm grasp of it, and we just don't have a lot of pool cards yet. But generally speaking, pool's shtick is risk-reward, and you can see this in its allies. They can be very powerful because they don't take consequential damage. This means they can do work for you for a long time, which is a great reward. However, they do come with the risk of an acceleration, amplify, or hazard icon. One amplify icon isn't a big deal, but 3 or 4 becomes painful. Another risk of playing pool is Crisis of Infinite Deadpools, which is basically a Shadow of the Past for the Dreadpool encounter set. To be honest though, Dreadpool isn't really that big a deal because there are ways to blank his text and actually defeat him. Anti-Regeneration Ray, which comes in that encounter set, and the Vivian ally can do this, and since Vivian is a basic card, I'm always going to run her when I'm running pool. Protection's shtick is obviously protecting. This includes increasing defense, reducing, negating, and even redirecting damage, canceling when revealed effects, and gaining tough status cards. Protection also has some really good healing with Med Team, Night Nurse, although this one's more about removing a status card, Momentum Shift, and What Doesn't Kill Me, which is also a ready. Protection has changed since the game launched. Defending used to mean only doing a basic defense, exhausting your hero to defend. But that changed with a rule update that said defending is also playing defense events, and that's actually made protection a much stronger aspect. Alright, so I've decided to run Justice to shore up Hawkeye's threat removal, so now it's time for my 3 rules of thumb. Again, this is just what I think about when building decks. My first rule concerns allies. I like to have 6 minimum allies and have gone as high as 13. The reason for this is your hero kit almost always has your most powerful cards, although there are a couple heroes where this isn't the case. Allies, in my opinion, are then your second most powerful cards. They stay on the board and continue to do work for you, and they can block. To do the math there, 6 allies in a 40 card deck is 15% of that deck, and 8 allies is 20% of that deck. My second rule concerns resources, which can be tricky. I want to have enough of them that I draw them when they're needed, but not so many that I draw a handful of them with nothing to play, and that has happened. So I like to set a threshold, but it does get a little mathy. For every 8 cards which cost 2 or more, I like 2 double resources. But then after 16 cards which cost 2 or more, I'll add 1 double for every 4 of those more expensive cards or portion thereof. This is true for the power of cards as well. If I have 8 or more aspect cards which cost 2 or more, I'll run 2 power-ofs. 7 or fewer, and I typically don't run any, although I am more relaxed there. And of course, this is not set in stone. Psylocke has 2 permanent resource generators on the board, but it is a good place to start. My third and final rule concerns adding and cutting cards. It has 3 stages, and I call them PB and J. Before I get into them, I want to say right now that I agonize, all caps, over a deck before I play it. This goes back to my competitive Magic the Gathering days, but is 100% not necessary with Marvel Champions. But for me, a huge portion of the fun I have with most card games is building decks. The first stage is asking, with every card I add, what is this card's purpose? Not what it does, because I can read that right on the card, but why is it here? That sounds unnecessary, but it prevents me from adding my favorite cards to the deck just because they're my favorite cards. They must serve a purpose. Next, after getting a deck where I think I want it, I go back over every card and ask, can this be replaced with a better card? Finally, while cutting cards, and then again as the very last pass, I'll ask, can I justify keeping this card? So PB&J stands for, what's this card's purpose? Is there a better card for the job? And can I justify keeping it? It's a pretty good exercise, and I'll refer to it again when I talk about deck testing. Finally, let's take a look at my Hawkeye deck, which I built following my rules of thumb, and I'll talk about Marvel CDB while we're there. Marvel CDB is a really powerful tool. It lets you look at your cost curve and resource distribution, which is important for some heroes. It also makes it really easy to swap cards in and out. The most important tool for me, though, is filtering. Filtering can help you find synergies between cards which you might have missed. A great example of this is my X-23 Protection deck. I had it in my head that Game Time was the team-up card for Wolverine and Colossus, but actually that card is Fastball Special. Had I done a proper filter, I would have seen that Game Time wasn't the card I thought it was. In the X-23 example, had I used X:"training, which means cards with training in their text, Game Time would have been on the list, telling me that it interacts with training cards. So use the filters, they're really powerful. K for trait and X for text are really powerful for finding synergies, but then I also sometimes use O for cost and the resource filters. Alright, this is my Hawkeye deck. Let's take a look at 2 numbers really quickly. The first is this version 0.8 that does speak to my agonizing nature. I did go in and tweak this deck quite a lot. The main thing I was tweaking was For Justice. For Justice is a card I usually automatically add when I am building a Justice deck, but I usually replace it with Clear the Area. However, since Hawkeye's basic thwart is 1, I did choose to keep For Justice. This will remove 3 and can remove 4, and since I have a lot of mental resources, I am going to keep For Justice. While I'm not building this deck for Rise of Red Skull, I am going to run that campaign with it, so this is going to help me in Taskmaster and again in Red Skull. The next number I want to point to is the 41 cards. I'm never afraid to run over 40, especially in a deck that can draw a lot of cards and tutor certain cards, and this deck has both. I do have my minimum of 6 allies, and they do all have a purpose. When we look at the cost curve, I do have 20 cards that cost 2 or more, and that fits perfectly with my resources. I did end up with exactly 5 resources. And just in this example, let's count the basic cards which cost 2 or more. That's Ironheart, Nick, Professor X, and Quinn Carrier. That's only 4, so I would not in this case add the Power in all of this. Let's do the same with our Justice cards. We have Monica, Wiccan, 3 for Justice, 3 for Surveillance Team, and 1 Heroic Intuition. That does give me enough cards to justify running 2 Power of Justice. Again, those are just my rules of thumb. Everyone does this their own way. Now, I do have 2 resource generators in Expert Marksman, but they only help with arrows. So I'm also running Quinn Carrier, and I did end up running Endurance because he is squishy with only 9 HP. So the real question is this deck any good? I don't know yet. A common question on Facebook is, which villains do you like to deck test against? I personally like Claw, Crossbones, and, while very controversial, Collector 1. Claw and Crossbones each have their own way of stressing your deck. High HP and or tough minions, minions with guard, resource pressure, which is what I call when you can spend resources to discard a villain's attachment, the ability to chew through their encounter deck quickly, and extra activations. These villains can throw a lot at you and provide a good indication of whether or not your deck can handle such pressure. Collector 1 massively disrupts your play with the collection, which more or less reduces your efficiency by half. Collector 1 literally steals cards from you and his own encounter deck, and mechanically steals your resources and actions. Once per round, you can spend 2 resources or exhaust your hero to remove a card from the collection. And by the way, there's a loss condition tied to the number of cards there, so if you don't want to lose that way, you have to do this. I feel like playing well against and even beating a villain with a deck that only plays half as well as it should is pretty good. So I'll test against these villains, and I'll make note of 2 things. Number 1, is there a card which I frequently decide to use as a resource rather than playing? If so, I need to PB&J it. Number 2, every time I lose, I need to determine why I lost. If it's consistently the same reason, I need to address that. If it's a different reason each time, maybe I just got unlucky with the encounter deck, but I'll still PB&J cards which I feel aren't pulling their weight. Jonathan, I hope that's what you were looking for. If not, please reach out to me in the comments. Please consider liking, subbing, and commenting with any questions you have because it'll really help my channel grow. I want to say thank you to everyone for watching, and I hope you have a marvelous day.